Hi, Mac from Mac's List here. Today's episode is brought to you by JobScan, the online tool that optimizes your resume and boosts your chances of landing an interview. JobScan also offers a 10% discount to our listeners. To learn more, visit jobscan.co/dreamjob. Now, let's start the show. This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps professionals find fulfilling careers. I believe that lifelong learning is the key to a successful career. And to get a better job, you need to learn the job hunting skills that will help you find the role of your dreams. That's why we're here today. Every week on Find Your Dream Job, I interview a different career expert. We discuss the tools and tactics you need to find the work you want. This week, I'm talking to Karen Wickre about why you need to network when you don't need help. Karen Wickre is an expert in networking. The former editorial director at Twitter, Karen has been called the most connected woman in Silicon Valley. She says it's more important than ever to connect with others. We change jobs quicker, we switch cities more often, and we stay in our careers longer. The most successful connectors, says Karen, nurture networks when they don't need help. They default to yes when others ask for something, and they pay attention to so-called weak ties that can lead to unexpected introductions and new ideas. Want to learn more? Listen in now at the Mac's List studio as I interview Karen Wickre about why you need to network when you don't need help. A longtime communicator and connector, Karen Wickre has spent more than 30 years in Silicon Valley as an editor and collaborator. Her new book, Taking the Work Out of Networking, An Introvert's Guide to Connections That Count, reflects her lifelong interest in making meaningful connections. An avid media consumer, Karen also serves on the board of several organizations supporting journalism and news literacy. She joins us today from San Francisco in California. Karen, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Mac. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's nice to have you. And this is one of my favorite job search and career topics, networking. And why, of course, we're talking today about why you need to network when you don't need help. Often, Karen, when people start a new job, they stop networking. Why is that a mistake?
Yeah, you're quite right. People do because they think, well, I'm good now. I have the job I wanted to have, and so I'm digging in where I'm working. That's fine in the moment, but we all know, I think, that jobs don't tend to last forever. People don't work at one employer for their career lifetime. Those days are long gone, and change comes to all of us, and sometimes we want to make change. So the idea that you would continue to have informal contact, what I sometimes call keep in loose touch with people for all kinds of related interests to your job and your career is more important than ever, because we all experience change and job fluidity really throughout our lifetimes. And by the way, networking isn't just about jobs. It's also for other kinds of resources and leads and introductions you might want for all kinds of things, whether it's for conferences or traveling abroad or, moving to another city. Many things require the help of people you might not currently know in order to have kind of better, smarter information for yourself. That's really what I think good networking is all about.
Let's talk about your definition of networking, because many of our listeners, I think, when they think about networking, they think about some social mixer where somebody's going around the room collecting cards, and that's about as far as it goes. How do you define networking, Karen?
Well, really, it is the subtitle of my book is, I think, how I'd like to define it, which is making connections that count. And maybe another way to think about networking is don't think of it as a verb. Think of it as network is the noun, right? You have a network. But when I think that what you described with the room and the business cards is exactly what people dislike about it, because it seems forced, it seems inauthentic, it seems you might be in a panic because you have to find a job for whatever reason quickly. And so you're kind of under the gun there and talking to strangers who may or may not be useful to you. Whereas if you kind of build the muscle of connecting with people who you genuinely like and have some rapport with, they become part of your brain trust. And that is the way I prefer to think about networking, is like, who can I tap in my brain trust to help me with this particular question?
So what does that look like in practical terms? Because if you're not going to that function room at the airport hotel, what are you doing on a regular basis, Karen?
Well, a couple things. I'm a big fan of one-to-one, coffee dates or breakfast, or, like an afternoon coffee, as I say, something like that, where you can actually genuinely meet someone, even for 30 or 45 minutes, and have a bit of a conversation. Of course, that can go on longer if it's good. You're doing that with some context and some basis. If it's someone you don't know, you've been introduced or you've reached out and they've agreed to meet you, but there's some reason you're meeting. It's not just general networking. It's because they have the kind of job you want, or they work at the company you're interested in, or vice versa. And so there's context for that sort of one-to-one meeting that can be very valuable. Even, by the way, to learn that maybe you wouldn't want to work at that company, or you're not so interested in that kind of role that you thought you were. But online, in addition, I talk a lot about this in the book. It's never been easier to connect with people online and also then keep in touch with people online, so that you do feel connected. And in some cases, you may never have met in person. It's great when you can, but there are times that you can't. Geography interferes. And so to be in touch online requires a little bit of a regular habit of sending out a note, sending out a message, saying, thinking of you, what's going on, let's catch up. Sometimes becomes a virtual coffee date. And sometimes it's an email exchange. So it's a mix of those things, in person, online, where you're one-to-one with somebody about specific, things you're looking for or questions you have, and that they're doing the same with you.
And how do you make these choices, Karen? Because we only have so many hours in the day, and we've got a job, family, interests outside of work. And if you're going to be doing these meetings or making these connections online, how do you choose who you do this with?
That's a great question. And I would say the first thing is, you're not networking with everybody all the time. You're not making connections with everybody for all reasons all the time. There's probably something that's driving a particular need. And if we just keep it to jobs or career advice, that's going to be a relatively small number of people that either you may know or you'd like to know based on what you see on their profile or someone that you share in common. It's a handful of people maybe that you're interested in. They're in the same industry or would like to be, where you're just reaching out intermittently and not every day. You're not. I'm not for filling your schedule with coffee dates. These things are kind of at your convenience. If there is a deadline about a particular thing, that should be established between the two people so that you can make time. But hopefully, if you're doing this sort of consistently, there are not that many, urgent deadlines that come up, and it's more about having the conversation, getting the lead, having someone say, I'm not the right person, but let me introduce you to so-and-so, and then a follow-up. It's basically an ongoing kind of rolling process. So it should not be full-time. It is not all day, every day. And you're really pursuing maybe one or two interests or questions or problems that you need at a time.
Well, so that's what you ask people for help with, Karen, when you're reaching out to your network. And it's not all about taking, though, is it? It's also good networkers also give, don't they?
Absolutely. That's part of the point of this kind of rolling process I was mentioning, is that, we all have needs or questions or would like an introduction sometime or other. But, sometimes we don't want to just be takers. We also, in sort of an ecosystem of people connecting, sometimes you're the one asked for your help, your advice, the lead you have to somebody or other. And so generally I would encourage people to kind of default to yes on agreeing to meet or help or, talk to someone who's looking for information. It doesn't require you to fill all your time. People are generally pretty efficient with here's the connection I need. A small example, if I may. Just yesterday, I got email from a friend of mine in Australia, and she wrote and said, "Do you know anyone who's a social media consulting business, a small firm, for doing some contract work for my friend at a company?" And I said, "Yes, I do. Here's information on that person. Do you want to meet him, or do you want me to meet your friend, or how do you want to do it?" So she writes back, since it's Australian time, a little, off of my clock today, and says, here's the introduction. Meanwhile, I've written to my friend a quick email to say, you might hear from somebody from this company. I don't know, but, here's what they're looking for. She writes back and says, great. Then I get the email saying, let me introduce you to. I quickly write my email to my friend and hand her off and say, here are the two of you who need to be talking. Enjoy. So, all told, that probably took 10 minutes of my time over, 36 hours. And that connection was made. The person who had the question now has someone to talk to about an answer. I don't know if that's the right solution, but, then I know my friend will refer her on if it's not. So that's kind of the way, ideally, you see this kind of information, like, intake and outflow going.
Well, that's how it works. I know you're a big fan of nurturing networks, and I want to talk more to Karen about the benefits of doing what you just described. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Karen Wickre will share more of her advice about why you need to network when you don't need help. Did you know that many employers use a machine to screen job applications? It's called an application tracking system, or ATS. If you want your resume to get past the ATS, you need to use the right keywords. Otherwise, you'll never make the cut, even if you're the perfect fit. JobScan has an online tool that can help. It finds and recommends language you can use in your resume and cover letter to get past the machines and in front of hiring managers. JobScan offers a 10% discount to our listeners. To get it, go to jobscan.co/dreamjob. Again, that's jobscan.co/dreamjob. We're back in the Max List studio. I'm talking with Karen Wickre. She's an expert in networking, and Karen is also the author of the new book, Taking the Work Out of Networking, An Introvert's Guide to Connections That Count. And she joins us today from San Francisco in California. Now, Karen, before the break, you told a great story about how you connected two people, and it took you about 10 minutes to do that. One person was in the United States, the other in Australia. And what do you think will happen then? What are the kinds of benefits that result from making those kinds of connections, not only to the two parties you introduced, but to someone like yourself who makes that introduction? How can that help in a career?
I think, well, for the two people first, that was a specific question for hired help, right? And so my friend is help for hire. So I hope that's a direct connection that leads to a joint project for the two of them. Even if it didn't, it could be that they because they're now connected, there might be future work. It might be that something different comes out of it that is not immediate, but nonetheless, they now have that connection to pursue. For me, frankly, I love people not going away empty-handed. I love to be able to say, I don't know the answer to this, but here's someone who might, or here's an article I just read about this that might. That's a personal satisfaction for me, and I think it's just something I have the impulse to do. But I do think that, as I say, the default to yes for being able to help people in the moment, however briefly, is beneficial in this sort of greater sense of kind of giving and getting, and maybe a little bit paying it forward is one way of thinking about it too, if you like, where we are all here to kind of help each other along. And I also believe that there's no one person typically who has the answer for you to your specific question. It's more like you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle or something like that, where it's like you're piecing together the information that you need that is going to suit you. And so when you have these sort of touch points of these brief conversations and exchanges, they help you, along your way. And I think that's something that I think people working inside companies need to cultivate themselves for, their own internal network. I think it's something that it just helps us all in the sense of, we're here to, kind of enrich and enlarge each other if we have useful information. That's just kind of my viewpoint. I don't think I'm alone in that. I hope I'm not.
I don't think you are. I agree with your advice, and certainly not only in my own career, but among my peers and the people I know in my field, the folks who do what you just described enjoy a lot of success. That's not why they do it, because many of them, like you, love to be of help to others. But those who do provide that kind of service, I've found, also enjoy professional success along the way too.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I also think in relation to sort of the nature of work today, as I said before, nobody has a job for life anymore, very, very few people. So the idea that, we're all competitive in our own silos and we can't talk to anybody else, because that's somehow affects the competition. I mean, that's just, I think, an old idea. I mean, I think now people want to be helpful where they can, even among competitors. And this is something I've learned in my years in Silicon Valley. There's a great spirit here of helping one another on a personal level, even as you are keeping trade secrets and, not sharing competitive information, but saying, I can help you with this, and I can't help you with that, but here's someone who can. I mean, to me, it's an absolute benefit to one's professional life and standing today, where perhaps it didn't have as much emphasis in the past. Now, I think it's vital to have.
And I'm curious, Karen, what have you seen in your career with the people who don't practice these habits? What kind of success do they enjoy? People who aren't inveterate.
I mean, this is maybe this isn't scientific, but I mean, just in my own observation, that they live in a smaller universe and they're not as well informed about what's going on in the world if they're extremely competitive and kind of secretive about their work and their organization and their information. It's a world where information flows and people learn from each other and take ideas from each other, even to some degree, that when you don't have that, I just see a smaller and more limited world that is not beneficial to that person, especially, frankly, if they're a leader.
And what would you say to people who are listening who think, well, that sounds good, but I don't have a lot to offer, or I don't have a network?
I had this question recently. I was talking to a group of graduate students here in a journalism program. And one young woman said to me, she said, I don't have anything to give. If I'm asking someone for the favor of their time, I don't have anything to give because I'm, young and inexperienced. And I said, you bring your questions. That's actually your gift. That you're the one who's curious and wanting to learn. And that's helpful to the other person to see your perspective and so on. You do have something. You may have ideas for that person. So I would say there's always some exchange, even if it's personal, even if you both find out you're rooting for the same sports team. there's something in the personal exchange that is of value that you should never decide. I don't have enough to bring to the party. But in addition, I'd say that for anyone who is saying I don't have a network, you actually do know more people than you think you know, and that's because you do work with people now. You have worked with people in the past. You have maybe classmates. You have former clients, if you were in that kind of business, former vendors or contractors or consultants you've worked with. There's a broader category of people who could be in your network. Then it's not the same as friends and family, right? It's a broader group that includes people we might call your weak ties. And these are sometimes the very people who can, when you do connect with them and talk to them, they say, well, why didn't you say so? I know someone who does that. I'm happy to introduce you. But you won't know that until you've had that conversation. And so thinking about a broader meaning for network perhaps is a good way to start. And then maybe even listing, here's people I know that I'm comfortable reaching out to.
Tell us more about weak ties. What are weak ties, Karen, and why are they so important in both professional and personal networks?
Well, the phrase weak ties came a number of years ago, about 40 years ago, from a sociologist who was doing a study specifically about people looking for jobs. And what he found is that people's weak ties, similar to the ones I've just described, people you aren't in touch with, don't feel as directly connected to, maybe haven't seen in even years, are sometimes the ones who are the most helpful at helping you find your next position. And he did a controlled study with people in relationships, to this end, for now a very well cited paper about weak ties. I think the principle still holds, and I think it is, again, broader than just for jobs. So, for example, it may be that when you say, you know what, I'd like to learn more about being on a board. I'd like to be on a nonprofit board or even a for-profit board. Well, it could be that you might not know in your immediate circle someone who knows. But if you kind of put that out there and you have, say, in your conversations or on perhaps your LinkedIn summary, I'm interested in this, when you mention it to people, someone may say, oh, you know what, my brother-in-law is on a board, or he's a nonprofit board consultant who specializes in this, or I know someone who, just got onto a board. And so that's who you should talk to. It's not something that you were having a conversation with a friend about. It's something that came up because you kind of put the stated need out there, or someone saw that and said, oh, I'd like to help with that.
Well, I want to close by asking, what are the daily networking habits that you recommend people follow?
Well, I may be a little anomalous in this because I do.
You did write a book about it.
I'm online a lot and I read a lot, and I like passing things on a lot, right? I like, sharing information a lot. So, but I would say, just as a general habit, when I, for example, warm up in the morning, let's say I'm facing the screen and the inbox, As I'm reading through, newsletters or, the morning's news, which I often will scan Twitter for example, I will see something or other that makes me think of someone, first and foremost, and I will immediately send that off to someone, either email, maybe Facebook Messenger, maybe Twitter direct message, or if a LinkedIn message, whatever's the sort of channel of choice that I know with that person, just to say, dying to know what you think of this story, or what did you make of today's news? Let's catch up soon. That does not require an answer. I might get one, nice, but it's a way that I just I might do that kind of thing to maybe, I don't know, 8 or 10 people, just off the top of my head. More specifically, if I have interest, I keep sort of a running list of who do I need to either make an introduction for or ask a specific question to. Let me fire off those notes right away, just so they're off of my desk, so to speak, and onto someone else's to answer when it's convenient. And that's just like part of my morning to-dos, I think. They don't have to be morning, can be, end of day or something else, but it's just people are on my mind, the questions are on my mind, the tasks are on my mind. So I just send them out there for eventual response. And that's my routine.
All right. Well, that's terrific. I actually follow a similar routine. I don't reach as many people as you, but I certainly have found that just connecting with people on a regular basis pays all kinds of dividends, not only for an individual and their career, but just for the community as a whole. It makes the places where we live and work better and stronger.
We see eye to eye on this, Mac.
I think we do. Well, Karen, tell our listeners, what's next for you?
I'm continuing to talk about my book, and it's interesting in talking to companies about it. They sometimes are inviting me in to meet with teams and talk to them. I've gotten very interested in how employees within companies also do their networking, because it's equally valuable for them too. So anyway, I'm focusing a little more on that. I may do some extra writing about that, in addition to continuing to talk about the book and making connections that count.
We might have to bring you back if that leads to another book, to have you talk about that topic too, because that's fascinating. Karen, I know people can learn more about your book by visiting your website, and that URL is KarenWickre.com. We'll be sure to include a link to both to your book and your website in the show notes and the website article for this show. Karen, thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much, Mac. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Take care. As I mentioned at the start of the interview, networking is one of my favorite topics. So it was a lot of fun for me to talk with Karen about that. And I hope it was useful for you as well. I especially liked her suggestion about daily networking habits, because when you think about networking in the abstract, it can be overwhelming. And she laid out, a reasonable approach that could take 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes, depending on your schedule. And so you can expand it or shrink it. And I liked her idea of connecting with a certain number of people every day. If you're going to do that, you will see dividends down the line, just as you do when you invest in a daily practice of exercise or healthy eating. Before you make that kind of investment in online networking, however, make sure your online house is in order. We've got a course that can help. It's called How to Wow and Woo Employers Online. It's 3 short video lessons, and it will help you put your best foot forward online. You can get your copy today. Go to maxlist.org/wow. Again, that's maxlist.org/wow. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Find Your Dream Job, and please join us next Wednesday. Our guest expert will be Dalen Vanterpool. He'll explain how to choose the right career for you. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.